Okay. We're going to start on Genesis 22, I guess.
Yes.
Genesis 21, verse 22. And when we begin our Torah study, we usually say a prayer, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. You have sanctified us through your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves in things of Torah. Well, this is I'm glad we stopped where we did, because this sort of is a prelude to the binding of Isaac. And so it would be interesting to take note of a few things. If somebody would like to read verse 22.
And it was at that time that Abimelech and Michal, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, saying, God is with you in everything that you do. And now swear to me here by God that you won't act falsely to me and to my offspring and to my posterity. Like the kindness that I've done with you, you'll do with me and with the land in which you've resided. And Abraham said, I'll swear. And Abraham criticized Abimelech about a water well that Abimelech's servants had seized. And Abimelech said, I don't know who did this thing. And also, you didn't tell me. And also, I didn't hear of it except for today. And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. And Abraham stood 7 ewes of the sheep by themselves. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what are these 7 ewes that you've stood by themselves? And he said, because you'll take these 7 ewes from my hand, so that it will be evidence for me that I dug this well. On account of this, he called that place Beersheba, because the two of them swore and made a covenant in Beersheba.
Okay, let's stop at that point.
Okay.
Let's stop at that point, because we've covered a lot of different ideas right now.
Shabbat Shalom. Good morning. Sorry I'm late.
Oh, Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Last week, it is Abimelech, or Abimelech, as opposed to the other pronunciations. The rabbi had mentioned that mentioned that to us. So Abimelech and his chief of troops, Phicol, or Fickle, I'm not sure how you pronounce that name, but God is with you in everything that you do. Does this, any comments about this? Does this remind you of anyone else that we're going to read later?
And I
The story of Balaam.
Oh. Yeah,
Right?
Yeah,
And did you want to say something, Ruth Ann?
Yeah, he was supposed to curse them and didn't. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. And then it goes on, therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my family and countrymen, but will deal with me and with the land in which you have sojourned as loyally as I have dealt with you. And what does that imply?
It almost sounds like a covenant or beginnings.
The beginning of one, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so Abraham goes ahead and swears to it, and basically repeats it, that he's sojourned as loyally as I have dealt with you. And Abraham then says, I swear it. So therefore, they are forming a covenant between two men. Any comments at this point?
I have a question.
Sure.
21:31, on account of this, he called that place Beersheba because the two of them were there. What is the Hebrew Beersheba mean?
Well, one interpretation, well of seven or well of oath. So there are two different ways of saying it, and
Because there are obviously two different stories that were associated
right.
with the place. Yeah.
So I know you jumped ahead a little bit, but the pact is sealed with 7 U's, and I am not aware of why 7 is mentioned. It could have said just a group of U's. Rabbi, is there any meaning to the number 7 that I should be aware of?
What the tour guides usually say is that there may have been 7 little oases or something that the locals identified it as a place that the number 7 was important, and then there's the overlay that this was the place where they had their swearing and they accepted the oath.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Steve. Steve, your sound is not turned on.
He's muted.
Yeah, I just got in. Literally just got in, so I don't know where we are.
Okay, we are, I guess we would say Genesis 21, verse 29. We were discussing why 7 U's. The rabbi mentioned that there were probably 7 different oases or wells that were important here. And then, as Larry pointed out about Beersheba, the name relates to the well of 7 or the well of oath. So
Probably the well of oath is more correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, Gail.
Rabbi, is there any particular reason why it's 7 ewes and not 7 rams? Is there any commentary on that?
Not that I can think of offhand.
Okay.
It just may have been which animal dedicated for sacrifice was available.
Okay, but
something like that. Yeah.
They're females
Yeah.
who breed.
But there's nothing at that point from the Israelite or Jewish literature that would say we're going to use ewes rather than rams or doves or something in this particular.
I was just thinking because the ewes might be pregnant or be able to reproduce where the rams would not. So that might have been made them more valuable. I don't know.
Don't know either.
Okay.
We'll speculate together.
When I see the name 7 U's, for some reason I connected them as I was reading with God made the earth, etc. in 7 days. And I connected with that immediately. So I connected it with God in that way.
The etymology Joanne, the etymology is that it's more than coincidence that the word for 7 is also the same word for swearing an oath. Okay? Because by swearing an oath, you're bringing God into your contract or agreement. So, and since 7 was the ideal number, God obviously chose to create the world in 7 days. Therefore, 7 is the most meaningful number for God. Therefore, if we're bringing God into our agreement, we should refer to it with the number 7. That's how they link together linguistically, or at least alliteratively.
If we would go to, does somebody want to read the rest of Genesis 21?
You want me to finish it since I started?
Yes, please,
Okay.
please.
I guess I start at 30, right? Yes.
Yeah.
And he said, because you'll take these 7 ewes from my hand, so that it will be evidence for me that I dug this well. On account of this, he called this place Beersheba, because the 2 of them swore there and made a covenant in Beersheba. And Abimelech and Phicol, I'm not sure, the commander of his army got up and went to the land of the Philistines. And he planted a tamarisk in Beersheba, and he called the name of the Lord El Olam. And Abraham resided in the land of the Philistines many days.
Okay. Any comments at this point?
You know, who was asking last week about the 70 or 72 names of God? There's another one.
Yeah.
El
Yes.
Olam.
That's right.
That's the first time that we encounter that one.
Yeah.
That's right. How many times are we going to see? I think it's only occurs one other time. Is that right? According to Rabbi Blount? It's
El Olam?
yes.
I believe so.
Elohai Olam is seen in Isaiah. So it's interesting that in some cultures at this time, they had separate gods for each one of these attributes. And here it's one God having multiple attributes, which I think is an interesting aspect of this.
Okay, Marty,
Yes.
when I see Olam, I think of Tikkun Olam.
Yes.
Right. No.
Yes, to repair the whole universe or the world.
Yeah.
Yes. There a commentary about a long time. It's from verse 34 that Abraham resides in the land of the Philistines for a long time. And the commentary here suggests that this appears inconsistent with the immediately preceding passage wherein Abraham dwells at Beersheba. Therefore, the verse should not be read as an end to the passage, but should be detached and taken as a general postscript to the preceding chapters and as an introduction to what will follow. In other words, during this time of his life, Abraham lived in the area later to be known Philistia. I think that's a little much over a short phrase, but you could say as if you were reading in a novel without any footnotes, you would just say, okay, that ends that part of his life and something new is about to begin. His life isn't over. And so I don't see, personally, I don't see that much other than that in the saying, and I'll turn it over to the group. What does the group feel?
I agree. Makes sense.
It's just an interlude. Yes.
It makes sense. What you're saying, I agree with that. Yep.
All
Yeah.
right. It's an interlude. Now we enter. Any other comments about what we had been reading? Okay, so now we're going to move on to Genesis 22, verse 1. And this is the description of the Akedah, or Akedah. And one of the things that that we're about to hear or read is that God is again, after a period of time, God is calling Abraham again. Okay, so would somebody like to read verse 1 from verse 1?
Marty,
Yes.
Marty, can I just have the need to say this. Okay?
Sure.
Please, 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 as we look at this story, which is indeed is one of the most important stories in all of Jewish sacred literature, to me, the introductory phrase of sometime afterward, or so it happened, is there to remind us that this is not an isolated experience. This experience, it comes for Abraham and Isaac and Sarah, whatever, after the events that we've just been discussing. So we all too frequently, this is a story that's pulled out of context, and I would suggest that we need to look at it in context.
Okay, yes.
End of my comment.
No, that's a very important comment that you made, as the discussion will follow. So if somebody would like to read from sometime afterward.
I'll read.
Okay, thank you.
And I am reading from my Catholic Bible, and I have my Jewish Bible here now. And so right away I can see differences. The testing of Abraham. Sometime after these events, God put Abraham to the test. He called to him, "Abraham?" "Ready," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son Isaac, your only one. There you shall offer him up as a holocaust on a height that I will point out to you." Shall we stop or keep going?
No, you can. Why don't you go verse? Stop at the end of verse 2.
Oh, okay.
You just did.
Yeah.
I just did.
Okay. And what comments at this time? Why here, after everything that has been said, is God going to put Abraham to the test? I thought all of these other things that we've been reading are tests also. Yes, Larry.
Okay. Take your son, your only one. Now, what about Ishmael?
But wasn't he sent away already?
But
Yes.
the word only one?
Because he was the only one at home still.
Oh, okay. That's one way to look at it.
So what were you getting after, Larry? What were you going to say?
That Abraham has two sons. Okay, one here, one not.
Okay. So what about the word only?
Right, I think that's not correct.
If, yes, okay, it depends how you view the word only. If it's, you can say about anyone who sires illegitimate children, has multiple sons or daughters, because you include that, or if you have from previous marriages. Okay, so which one is going to be the important one? One has been sent away and one is there, and also it's of his own seed to his wife, Sarah. So I don't know. I'll open it to discussion. I believe Jerry. What?
Joanne, yeah.
Joanne, right.
I have the two Bibles going here. And in this one, it's called favored one rather than only one.
Right.
So Isaac is his favored son. And that gives a different connotation to it. It means one that he goes for walks with or teaches how to fish, or, someone that he really enjoys being around.
But we need the Hebrew word here.
Yes, because there's another way to look at it. It could be my favorite son. My favorite son.
No.
The word that's used is
No.
yachid.
Yachid cha.
Okay.
It's your.
It's your, but it
Right.
could,
Yachid cha, making it yours. Yeah. But the basic word that's used is yachid, which generally means only. I'll have to look it up and see if it can mean exceptional, perhaps. Perhaps it can mean exceptional. I'm going to look it up in the etymological dictionary and see
could
if
it
there are any
also
other
imply,
parallel definitions for yachid.
okay, I see a number of hands that have been raised, but I just want to pose one question about this. Could it also be that your favored son, or your only son, is also because God is favoring him? Steve, you just blotted out.
I think he just went to get a book, I think.
So what I'm going to do is first call on the rabbi, then Suzanne, and then Steve.
It's one of the reasons why this particular portion or this chapter will probably be on here for several weeks, because we can stop almost at every word. The Talmud has a midrash, an imaginary conversation. God speaks to Abraham and says, calls out to him. Abraham says, Hineni, because he was reading off of Marty's shirt. And, right?
Yes.
Aren't you wearing a Hineni shirt? Okay, all right.
That's right.
Here I am. God says, take, in this order, take your son, take however we want to translate, your only, your exceptional, your favorite, whatever, whom you love, goes, and the Talmud records a dialogue. God says to Abraham, take your son. But God, I have two sons. No, I mean the one who, your only one. No, or your favorite one. No, how does a parent decide which child is favorite? The one whom you love. Well, but I love them both, even though one, as Ruth-Ann was saying, one's no longer under my roof, no longer in my household, but I still love them both. And then finally God says, no, I'm talking about Isaac. And that's why there's this identification going down the line of all four. And matter of fact, there are those who say, if you're putting this in the context of a test of Abraham, and I don't necessarily like that translation. We'll talk about that, I'm sure during the morning. But that's the beginning of the test of, does God, how does Abraham define his relationship with Isaac as opposed to his relationship with Ishmael, who's also his son?
Okay.
So,
Yes, Steve, I'll call you on you. Suzanne is next, and then I'll call on you.
Okay, I have a question. In that first sentence, well, my version says God did tempt Abraham. It bothers, I don't like
test or tempt?
tempt. T-E-M-P-T.
There's no justification in the Hebrew, none whatsoever, for a translation of tempt.
Okay.
Someone's adding this translator's adding his or her own, own understanding or relationship to the story, but it's not.
Okay.
That's not the Hebrew.
Well, does the Hebrew? My question is, does the Hebrew actually say test?
Yes, that's what he just said.
Well, if Steve's got the dictionary right there, whatever. But you remember?
I'm sorry. I was just.
What's the operative phrase from Hanukkah when you spin the dreidel? Who remembers? What are the
Nes Gadol Hayasham? Is that what you're saying?
Nes Gadol, right? Nes is a miracle. It's the verb here. Okay, God nisa et Avraham. God miraculously provided this thing, or a nes can also be a sign, like an ensign on a flag on a sailing ship, or it can also, a nisayon can be an experience, which is kind of the way that I understand it, that God created this experience for Abraham, not necessarily a test.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of a test. That doesn't seem right to me. It never did. Experience.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, I'm okay with that. The translations into English aren't perfect, so I mean.
But again, for those who are educators, and teachers, or have some of that in your background, I remember, I don't know if Steve or anybody else who studied in Israel might have had the same experience, but we had a teacher in high school who said there's a major difference between a mivchan or a bechina, that's a real test, and a nisayon as an experience, So let's see how you do with this experience rather than with a specific test of your knowledge.
Yeah, I like experience better. I think that's more in keeping with the story and God, in my personal opinion.
Okay, Steve.
Marty, you had actually asked me about the word, or someone had asked about the Hebrew word for clarification, so I'm kind of going back to that. Yachid was the word that was used, Gail. And actually, Yehud, it does, roots in Hebrew can sometimes switch around a little bit. And Yachad, Yud, Chet, Dalet sounds a little bit like Echad, which is one. So it does have sort of a connotation of oneness, but it can also be, there's a word in Hebrew called Yehud, which is the uniqueness. So it could imply that, that not exactly, he wasn't exactly the only one, but he was the set aside one. Sometimes something that's set aside can be Yehud.
Yeah. Okay. Before I go ahead, Rabbi. Go ahead, and then I want to mention what Grace has said.
Just a sidebar. If some of you are saying what Steve was enlightening us about, you remember the word yachad, which is together, like hine matov shevet achim gam yachad. Right, so yachad is together. We become one together. But if the word yichud that he was describing, if that sounds familiar to any of you, especially if you change the pronunciation a little bit and becomes yichud, Yichud is the bride and grooms having a moment of privacy after they've been
That too,
pronounced husband
yes.
and wife at the marriage. Then they're supposed to go off into a private room, not necessarily to consummate the marriage, but that moment of Yichud is when they become one in the mystical sense. So that's where the word, if it sounded familiar to you from something, that's where that comes from also.
I want to recognize Grace Farrar because she mentioned something. Grace, would you like to say what you mentioned to me? What you brought up, that your belief is that his favorite son is because of the age of the mother who gave birth to his son.
I believe
This
that it was
particular-
miraculous, yeah, because what woman do we know, gave birth to a child later in life, right? And this was much later in life that she was able to conceive, and for however long the periods were, that was beyond miraculous. And I think that in the concepts, that was something to take into consideration. I don't like to interrupt, so I just thought I would put it in. I'm attending other Zoom meetings throughout the country and the world, and they do things a little bit differently, so I don't know who will be able to read what I put. Forgive me, I have problems with my hands, so I just did it in all caps because it's easier. No
It's
other
okay.
reason, just in case. So it's just a thought that I
Sure,
wasn't
but
sure.
it's an
if you got it.
important one. It's an important
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don, you had a comment.
I didn't a question. I'll be brief too, because I just had oral surgery yesterday, so you'll be glad I can't talk for very long. But just coming quickly to the translation, whether it's tempt or test, tempt is out of the Christian translations because they always try to correlate the New and Old Testaments, and Jesus was tempted by Satan many times. And so I think, and this particular portion of the Tanakh is correlated with that. But the question I had is, and I've been obsessed with this portion for decades, is that it implies to me that human sacrifice didn't start here, that it wasn't out of the ordinary for God to require human sacrifice. And it just struck me, I mean, Abraham seemed to take it in stride. Oh, you want my most loved son? Sure, but it also strikes me that this was the turning point in Judaism. It's the end of human sacrifice, and it's switched to animal sacrifice until the temples were destroyed, and then the Christians picked it up again in their religion. So, as I said, I don't know if any of you have read any of Kierkegaard, but he was also obsessed with this.
We're going to get to that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So anyway, so my question is, what is the group's opinion, Rabbi's opinion, about whether human sacrifice may have been going on since before this?
Yes, Rabbi, you have your hand
Well,
up.
if and Don, wish you complete healing from your surgery. But that's certainly one of the classical explanations for the whole story and the whole experience, is to say to Abraham, no, you may have been very, very quick to accept the notion of human sacrifice, but that's not what we are going to be about. So that's certainly one. It's not the only, but it's one, maybe even the major way that classical and commentary has looked at the story. That's the lesson. That's the test, because it was common, and Abraham understood that God may want that. But ultimately, in the end result, no, Abraham, that's not what we're going to be about in our new covenant.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, Aline.
Well, Rabbi, you said the difference between experience and test. What you just said clarifies that. How an experience is interpreted is so personal. There's emotions, there's all kinds of involvement in an experience. There's no recipe for experience, but a test, you either pass or you don't. So to discuss an experience makes sense, and I'm glad you've talked about that, Rabbi. Thank you.
This was part of a discussion that a group that I was with, and another rabbi mentioned that the righteous are tested more heavily or to a greater extent than the average man. I'm sort of summarizing that way, and that it is a test of true faith. But any comments about that? Yes, Larry.
When God and Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham bargained with God and tried to diminish the destruction.
Yeah.
Here he went, never questioned. Why not?
Yeah, this is something that's important. Let's go. He could have even bargained here. There are a lot of different ways of dealing with this situation. Would that have resulted in the same solution to the question of absolute faith in God versus morality and any ideas? Yes, Steve.
Yes, yeah. Well, I think you asked a question and kind of answered it rhetorically, because and again, I sort of always go back to the myth and the drama. It would be less of a story if he bargains him down and God says, hey, you know what? I didn't really mean it. But, if he's just on the verge of carrying it out,
yes,
his hand is stayed at the last minute. It's extremely dramatic.
Okay.
It's a very powerful story. It's a very troubling story to us today. I would also, if I could just insert, we have a lot of scholars here, and if there have emerged many stories that we presume are Jewish stories that have actually been borrowed and adapted for our culture. Is there anything in any other culture that parallels this, that anyone is aware of? Someone having his allegiance to God tested in this way or in a similar way? In any of the mythologies that people are familiar with, because indeed it does stand out. It is troubling to our modern sort of ways of looking at things. It's a little bit awful, like why it makes God look almost sadistic as a character, to put someone who has been so loyal, has shown nothing but loyalty and for the most part very good traits in his is put through something so so harrowing. Does any other culture have something like this?
Before I call on anyone else, there are a whole number of hands that were up. Excuse me, but I wanted to make mention about two other midrashes or that have been out there. One is, and I do not know who this is attributed to, is that Abraham suspects that God knows that he will not go through with this.
Oh,
And so is going through all of this and knows that his hand will be stayed at the very last moment. And so that's one drash. In Islam, they have it that Abraham goes ahead and carries out the deed, that God does not stop and save Isaac at the very last moment. And they have a totally different story then, because then Ishmael has, the story takes up with Ishmael at that point. Yes, Rabbi.
Oh, you said there are
Oh.
many hands. So
Okay,
go ahead. I don't
okay.
have to be first.
The first one I noticed was Dawn. I know Suzanne had her hand. Joanne, did you have your hand up too?
Yes.
Yes, that's right. And anyone else, just raise your hand. So, okay, that whole column. Okay, okay, Don. First, you.
Yeah, just a question about, are there any comparative narrations? One of my favorite biblical scholars is Chaim Maccoby, a British biblical scholar, who is centered on, I'm coming back to human sacrifice, but his most well-known book is called The Sacred Executioner, and he traces preternatural killings back to Cain and Abel, and then follows them through all of mythology and other religions, and tries to develop a theme that what he called the sacred execution is essential to human psychology, and that it's the outlet for the connection between humans and deities, and the outlet for genetic aggression. But he does a nice job of connecting this portion of Abraham and Isaac to other threads, not only in the Tanakh, but also in other mythologies. I think there's a Scandinavian story involving Boulder and a similar almost killing, or there are some actual killings. If my jaw wasn't hurting so much, you'd have to hook out and pull me off here.
I understand.
And what was the name of the author again? I'm sorry.
Chaim Maccoby, Maccoby.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant guy.
Thank you. Okay, on my screen, I'm just going to go down the column. Joanne, then Larry, then Suzanne.
Okay.
Then me.
And then Rabbi, yes.
Because Isaac was promised by God, and at a very late age, that she became pregnant and had Isaac. I'm sorry, I waited so long, and I have all these wonderful ideas in my head. But I never questioned this before. I always assumed, well, he was promised by God, and God is testing him or giving him an experience, because Isaac was already from God. So Abraham and God had this relationship with Isaac, rather than, I just never questioned it before. I just assumed, okay, God is talking to him because they talked before about this child.
Okay.
It's just,
Larry?
Okay, later on, one of the commandments is thou shalt not kill. Now here he was told,
No, it's actually, excuse me, it's actually thou shalt not murder.
okay, murder. So is this, in this instance, is he being asked to murder? And why
We
does it?
we haven't gotten to him being asked to do anything other than
Well,
take your son to the land that I'm going to show you.
We didn't
Right.
get to that point yet.
We don't understand verse 3 yet, or 2.
okay.
Okay, we're still on verse 1, I think.
Well,
We're still
but
setting,
he does say,
setting the tone.
but he does say, I take him to the mountain and offer
Yes.
him as a burnt offering.
Yes.
Well, we'll get there. I'm going to jump in with that one too.
Okay. Any other, Suzanne, yes.
Okay. A comment and a question. I don't think anywhere so far we have seen anything about human sacrifice, although I'm sure it was a pagan practice back then. But I was wondering about the phrase burnt offering. Does that have a particular meaning? Is that, I mean, are there other types of offerings besides the burnt offering? I think there are. I just don't remember.
Yes, there are. Again, we're going to need to specifically examine that word, the phrase that they're translating there to offer as a burnt offering, or even I think Joanne said her translation was to offer as a Holocaust. But it's referring to, but much later on in Leviticus, where there's a description of especially the 4 major types of offering.
Offerings, right.
And burnt offering, where it means to be consumed entirely, which is why the translation is Holocaust. To be a burnt offering that's burnt entirely is only one of the 4. I think that's what you're referring to. Are there different types of sacrifices? But they're described and defined much later on in the Torah.
And is that for sin?
I'm sorry?
Is the purpose for removal of sin, or I mean,
Well,
No, that's chatat, and that.
That's the sin offering is a different. It's a different offer. It's a different definition, and what is being sacrificed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
okay, so
No, there's no inference at this point, either in the Hebrew words or in the experience of they're not Israelites, of the Hebrews yet, that would say that this type of offering is to compensate for sin, as opposed to a petitionary sacrifice asking for rain or victory or something like that.
Oh, okay.
They don't associate those yet.
Yeah.
So a burnt offering at this point in time could be for anything, for any reason.
The only sacrifices that we know at this point are worship sacrifices, praise to God or acknowledging God.
Oh, something like that. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I say
Yes,
something
Steve.
about Susan's question about the word that's used is olah. Olah. And that is like the word where some of us are familiar with, aliyah, is going up to the Torah. It's the root that means something ascending, something going up. So there's an implication in olah. That's the only word that's used as far as this sacrifice of Isaac. It implies that by some mechanism, he just goes up completely to God, presumably.
You mean the offering? Or Isaac would go?
Yeah, I'm talking about the offering of Isaac. Yes, the word that's
Okay.
used in Hebrew, the word that's used in Hebrew for that, when God is speaking to Abraham, tells him what to do. He tells him that you will provide him as an olah, which is this holy, consumed going up to God. I don't know. Would you agree with that, Rabbi? Is that sort of
that is one, and that is the I guess usual translation and interpretation. I'm going to suggest another one, and when we finally get to me.
Okay. Any other comments? Or we're really dissecting this very well. Would somebody like to read?
Wait, before you, I need to address verse 2 before.
Oh, okay.
On,
go ahead.
Be glad to listen to other people's comments first.
Okay. What? God is saying to Abraham that he will go to the land of Moriah, Mount Moriah, and offer him there a burnt offering on one of the heights, which I will point out to you. Any further comments on that? Yes, Rabbi.
Okay. All right. So let me jump in with a couple things, reverting back to some things that were said, as well as to introduce some new ideas. And the first is, as I said last week, also that it's kind of this is a hint. If you like this kind of discussion, and this is what I'd like to do in a class probably in the fall, dealing with some of these very well-known stories in the Torah and really dissecting them as you said. So watch for the invitation about that. Secondly, when Marty was mentioning both in the Jewish tradition, the Hebrew tradition, and the Muslim tradition, there are variant texts in the Jewish version of the Torah that has a different ending. Okay, most scholars would agree that the ending of this story, as we have it here, is an ellipsis. It's an addition ADD and also EDI. So it has been edited. There was indeed, as the Islamic tradition has it, there was indeed the story that Abraham did slay Isaac, but we're not going to go there because that's not what our text in front of us says. Someone was asking, I think Larry was asking and pointing out that Abraham did question God about Sodom and Gomorrah, and didn't when it came to sacrificing his own son. One very interesting perspective that I will start introducing you to now, and refer to it a couple times over the next few verses, but also in this class or opportunity that we might have in the fall, is one of the reasons that Abraham doesn't say anything to God about Isaac being, whether it's killed or whether it's isolated, however, is because he also didn't say anything when Sarah told him to banish Ishmael. So he's saying to himself, well, if I didn't speak up about banishing Ishmael, what right do I have to do it like that? Or if you want to look at it a different way, it's Abraham's way of kind of getting back at Sarah for forcing him to banish Ishmael. Now that opens up an entirely different line of thinking and understanding the story that goes along, because there's no justification for that in the text. That's our adding our own personal experiences on, and relationships, and the dynamics of what really might be going on between Abraham and Sarah, in addition to what's going on between Abraham and God. But the final thing that I just would like to point it out, throw it out on the table. Some of you may have heard this from me quite a number of months ago. This is not my reading. This is my rabbi back in Cleveland when I was studying with him about, and we would look at this kind of a portion. He presented this one, and I haven't seen it anywhere before, that the entire experience here could be read as a misunderstanding. So I draw your attention to, and Steve was giving us the translation of Olah based on Suzanne's question, that Olah is the burnt offering. The smoke goes up, the offering is burnt entirely, and it goes up in smoke. That's the Olah, the technical word. But the verb, God says to Abraham, go to Lech Lecha. It's a familiar phrase that God said to Abraham. Lech Lecha, to the land, to Moriah, and I want to add one little personal anecdote onto that in a moment. In Hebrew, it's V'ha'alehu sham la'olah, which literally means and lift him up to be the olah, to be the sacrifice. But my rabbi gave this interpretation, which I only present to you. It resonates with me, but it may not with you. So let me put words in God's mouth, so to speak. All right, Abe, you're getting to be an old man. Okay, it's time. Isaac is now mature. He's a teenager. He's going to inherit your leadership of the clan. It's time for you to take him up to the top of the mountain and teach him how to offer a sacrifice. Okay? Take him up to the top of the mountain to sacrifice, but not as a sacrifice.
Got it.
Okay? Take him up there, give him this experience, okay? And then put it in the context of father taking son for this, rite of passage. And Isaac will say to Abraham, where are we going, Dad? Just trust me, son. Are we there yet? Trust me, son, whatever. And they get to the top of the mountain, and Isaac ties him up. Matter of fact, the Hebrew translations and the Hebrew literature and tradition does not use the phrase the sacrifice of Isaac. It talks of the binding of Isaac. So this is really, Abraham is really making Isaac feel what it's like to be a sacrifice, but not to sacrifice him. And then, according to my rabbi, or those who follow this line of thinking, is Abraham kind of got caught up in the moment, and the angel or God in the intervention comes along and says, Abraham, don't do that. So I present that to you. That's a way of looking at the story that speaks to me. It may not to all of you, but it's an entirely different way of looking at this experience, like I said. So I throw that out. I just want to add one more minute of a thing, okay? The first time that not the first time, I'm sorry. When we went in rabbinic school, in yeshiva, we went to Jerusalem to study for the year. This is 1970. This was the text with which we began studying, those of us who were already fluent in Hebrew like I was. So the conversation is going on in Hebrew. We're sitting on for those of you who know the area, we're sitting on King David Street, the Hebrew Union College, which is a stone's throw from the King David Hotel in the city of Jerusalem. And the teacher, this conversation is going on in Hebrew. The teacher says, okay, how many of you remember the beginning of the Torah story of Genesis 22, the Akedah? And some of us knew it by heart, and we start to respond to it. And he says, okay. And he stopped us before we got to this particular phrase. He says, okay, where did this take place? Where did it take place? Har Moriah, Mount Moriah. And he said, no, that's not the answer I'm looking for. Well, wait a minute. We're questioning. And he said, here, let me show you where this took place. And he said, get up from your seats, walk out the door. And we went into the back courtyard of the school and looked out at Mount Moriah. And he said, that's the answer I was looking for. I want you to realize that you are standing within eyesight of where this actually took place. That's the beauty of studying this kind of a text when you're in Israel or in Jerusalem. Just that's a personal anecdote. Whenever I see that phrase, I remember Abraham Chen's voice saying, where did it take place?
Rabbi and Steve, I know the Hebrew is a little different, but we read that that Abraham also has dreams in which God is speaking to him or things happen. The question you have to raise is now Abraham is really in old age.
Mm-hmm.
Is this sort of carrying his faith too far if this isn't a dream? And I just tossed that out. Is this a comment also about being too zealous in the religion?
In this particular text, there's no indication that this is a dream or an imagined voice.
That's right. That's why I asked about the word.
Specifically, God says to Abraham, but the word that it's qualified. God says, "Kach na," please take your son. This is not a command. This is a request. That's why, like I said, my rabbi reads into that this is a supportive God. This is not a commanding God.
Okay.
This is nah. Okay, Abe, it's time. Please consider doing this.
And also, I don't know what the connotations of the word binding, are, the words that we use. You can also be bound to one's faith.
Mm-hmm.
And this requires some faith on Isaac's part too. We always speak about the faith of Abraham, but what about Isaac's faith that his father is doing all of this, but I have enough faith that he won't do it to me?
Mm-hmm.
Any comments there? Yes. Okay. First, I want to acknowledge Ruth Ann, and then Steve.
Well, it's just puzzling me here. The chronologically between chapter 21 and then 22. It says at the end of 21 that Abraham lived, he dwelled in the land of the Philistines for many days. I don't know what they mean, but days could be years, could be months. It could be anything. But is this the sequence of events? And then did this actually take place right now there in the land of the Philistines? Is this, and it kind of makes me wonder if it is chronologically, had God not been talking to Abraham for a while? And then all of a sudden, came up and said, hey, Abraham, go do this. And I think that would have made it way more powerful if Abraham had just been doing his own thing without God's interference, and all of a sudden God's there speaking to him again. So that's my question. I mean, is this a chronological order, or is this out of order like so much other stuff in the Torah is?
I'm taking it at face value that it's in sequence.
Yeah, I would say that it's in sequence, but obviously there's an intervening time where it's these number of days that he lived there or whatever. But by the time that this dialogue takes place of God speaking to Abraham, he's only a 3-day journey from Jerusalem. Okay, now the land of the Philistines and Beersheba, I suppose you could do it on a 3-day march. I would suppose might be a little difficult, but then again, it wasn't a whole caravan. It was just Abraham, Isaac, and his lads. So it's I don't know if that answers your question, but there's no reason to think that it's out of sequence.
Before I call on Steve, Grace, you mentioned that you think that Abraham knew that God would not follow through with this demand, and that God also knew that Abraham was his most faithful. Did you want to expand on that?
That was in context with, verse 1 and into, it was that we were talking, a little ahead of ourselves at that point. I was listening, and it's just my interpretation, because I listened to another rabbi, and I really love, his name is Manis Friedman, and he is a great interpreter for me and my studies. And, I'm still very confused because, I grew up with one parent being one faith and another parent being Jewish. And my Judaism only came into play of my knowledge 3 years ago. So I have a lot to learn, and I'm pulling from stories that I've been studying, my Jewish Bible, and I know that Abraham was really a very faithful and believed in God, and that it was just a miraculous event. And I love what I'm hearing here today even further, because it's a lot to think about, but it's also very heartwarming and opening. And thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, all of you scholars, for allowing me to be here. That's all.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you. Yes, Steve.
Yeah, kind of rewinding here a little bit, because you had asked me and the rabbi to explain a little bit more about the word Akedah, its origins, and what its connotation is. So I'm going back to that. And indeed, in most Semitic languages, it has a connotation of binding in Aramaic, in Syriac, and in Arabic. Agadah, tying and fastening. However, there's also another word that's used in the Bible, that appears in the Bible, called eked. Eked sounds a lot. It's the same, sounds similar. It's the same root. This is the place where the shepherds all gather together to bind sheep in order to shear them. So again, sort of a connotation of binding, and generally binding animals like sheep. Sheep are the animals that are very often sacrificed ultimately too. Now the particular form Akedah is very, very specifically the binding of Isaac. Okay, that's where it's used, that's its connotation. It's very specific to that. The binding of Isaac on the altar and the attempted sacrifice, depending on our interpretation, what the intent was and how far that was going to go. But so that's the sort of understandings of the word and its various forms.
Okay. Yes, Rabbi.
Yeah, agreeing with Steve. Later on in the Tanakh, later on in the Bible, especially in prophetic times, I forget whose question it may have been that was leading us this way, that the verb akedah of binding or bonding in a holy sense or in a sacred, sanctified kind of bond, there's an entirely different verb that's used. That's la'aros for erusim. That's used, and there's a verse from Hosea when you put on the tefillin, va'erastichli, that I bind you, I bind myself to you. We establish this bond. So I'm not familiar with the la'akod, la'akedah, having a spiritual connotation to it.
Okay. Any other discussion? So why don't we move on? We've sort of moved into this already in our discussion, but if somebody would like to start with verse 3 and read on from there.
Could I do that?
Sure, Joanne.
Because when I read from mine and then I hear other versions, it's quite interesting. Early the next morning, Abraham saddled his donkey, took with him his son Isaac and 2 of his servants as well, and with the wood that he had cut for the Holocaust, set out for the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham got sight of the place from afar. Then he said to his servants, "Both of you stay here with the donkey, while the boy and I go on over yonder. We will worship and then come back to you."
Okay, let's stop there. Okay, Rabbi, yes.
Glad you saw my enthusiasm. So, why does Abraham say to the lads, "We will return"?
Yes, right. Yes.
That's
If
right.
he thinks he's going to be sacrificing, slaying, killing
Right.
his son, what? Okay.
Yeah,
So I just throw out that question, and I'm wondering, Joanne, I'm sure you don't have an answer, but I'm wondering why your translation reverses the order, because the Hebrew text says that Abraham took his two lads with him and Isaac his son, but your translation said he took Isaac and the 2 lads. I just wondered why they flipped the order. Again, I wouldn't expect you to have an answer, but
my thinking there is they are servants, so you come with me. And so that just was an understood thing.
okay.
I'm sure you have a much different
I
explanation.
do not. That's the first time I've heard that the translation that flips it.
Okay.
Oh, Marty?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Steve.
Yeah. And in response to what the rabbi brought up just now about, well, why would Abraham tell his servants, "My son and I will come back"?
Yeah.
Afterwards.
Yep.
And again, in the older reading, I think that new interpretation of the sacrifice was never intended and everybody knew it is great. But looking at it as the old story, the Pshat version, Abraham is establishing an alibi. in the simple reading of it, he is telling them now that he's establishing his intent that, okay, yeah, we're going to come back afterwards, knowing that if this sacrifice ends up taking place, he's probably going to have to tell them something. Oh, gee, wild animal got him, you know? Something happened, something horrible, make something up. But, you know, it's just establishing, if he were to tell them, you know, my son and I are going to go off and worship God, and I'm going to come back later by myself, the servants are going to, what's that all about? You know?
They might try to stop him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
So
might
again,
run and tell
the
themselves.
simple reading of the old-fashioned surface story, where this is indeed some kind of, if you don't want to call it a test, an experiment, or whatever, that you know, that could end differently.
Suzanne and then Don.
Okay. Just a small comment. My version also says the two men first and then Isaac. The King James version says it, but like the Hebrew Bible. And then the other thing I wanted to say, although I don't recall seeing any evidence for this, but along the way, it's been suggested in some of the classes I've taken that Abraham and Isaac thought that Isaac was going to be resurrected. But I don't think up until this point that there's been any suggestion of resurrection. Not that I recall so far in reading Genesis. So I don't know how that
It's another version.
came about, but I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, that's in Coriant. I know that it's also in the
Right.
Coriant.
Right.
So I don't know if that's the source or not, but that's all I can say.
There's some very loose interpretations of some words and phrases a little bit later on, and when we get to them, I can point it out. But it's not, certainly for not for us. It's not necessarily an indication of a belief in resurrection,
Right?
Yeah,
or a proof for it. Right.
Yeah, nothing in Genesis so far has ever brought that idea up. So it's hard for me to go along with that idea, but I'm just saying it's another thought.
Okay. Don, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question, jumping back to verse 2. What would be the careful translation of God telling Abraham to bring Isaac up there for burnt offering? Because that up to then we don't know that Isaac is going to be sacrificed, and Abraham. It doesn't appear that Abraham really has internalized that, or doesn't really understand that. So I could see where he's telling the two lads that they'll both be coming back, because he may have actually believed that at the time. So I'm not a Hebrew scholar at all. Can anyone translate?
Well, it's v'ha'alehu olah would be, and lift him up to sacrifice. But whether it's to be the sacrifice or lift him up and demonstrate the process of offering a sacrifice, and that's debatable. They're both possibilities. There's certainly a major opinion and a minor opinion, but both are legitimate possibilities in translation.
Yeah, because it seems, there's a lot of dramatic tension right there. Like, especially if you know what's going to happen. Abraham may not have Okay, well, thanks.
In his religious zeal, or for whatever other motivation, he may have understood it one way, but God really meant it the other way.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it would have been a completely different story if Abraham returned alone.
Right.
The two
Yes.
lads were saying, where's Isaac? No, I just don't even want to go there.
That's right.
Thank you.
Larry, did you have your hand up?
No.
Oh, okay. Any other discussion at this point? Somebody want to read verse 6?
I just, excuse me, just to say that there is another way. I mean, we were looking at the, of the Abraham says, we'll go up. My son and I will go up to the top of the mountain. We'll worship, and then the nashuva alech, and then we will come back to you, meaning to the lads. There are those who say that's Abraham just exerting his authority to the fellas, don't question me, don't try to stop me, and using what we call the royal we, we're in charge. This, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another way of looking at it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Grace. Joanne.
I haven't thought it through, but could the lads have been some of Abraham's other sons? Because I would have thought that he would take servant, and that would be the word used. But because he says lads, I guess I think more kinship in some way.
We have no record of other sons at this point.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I know they list.
Yeah. And not our I'm translating as a youth or a lad, but it's understood as a as a servant boy.
Okay.
Kind of thing.
All right.
Gail, I know you sometimes like to read. Would you like to read verse 6?
6, where are we? And Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on Isaac, his son, and took the fire and the knife in his hand. And the two of them went together. And Isaac said to Abraham, his father, and he said, my father. And he said, I'm here, my son. And he said, here are the fire and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will see to the sheep for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went together.
Any discussion at this point?
Very creepy.
Okay.
Very what?
Creepy.
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 Well, it shows that Isaac is totally trusting.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I mean, because twice the text says
Yep.
that they walked on together.
Yep.
Right.
It was not that the dad had to pull him by his hand.
Right.
It was that they intentionally they walked on towards this experience together.
Okay, I'm looking at a book called The Bible, The Source Revealed, and the break here is very interesting that's coming up. So I'll have something to say on that in a few minutes.
Any question or any concern about the fact that Isaac is being burdened with everything? Physically burdened? Yes, Steve.
No, not specifically speaking to that, but again, this whole exchange between Abraham and Isaac would seem to be more supportive of your old interpretation of the story.
Yes.
That all the characters
Yes.
It looked like it was going to be carried out in exactly the way that we originally understood it. Because, they're adding a little dramatic twist here that, and again, with me pointing out the drama in the story, this is an element of drama in the story.
No question.
That they're not just proceeding with the act, but at some point, Isaac is kind of scratching his head and saying, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then Abraham persists with the story, Abraham puts on his best poker face and says, hey, we'll find out, what's going to happen when it happens.
We have no background history of conversation between Abraham and Isaac.
Right.
Of what was their level of communication. I just need to throw out also, it could have occurred to me as we were going through it with the Hebrew also. So we've now encountered another name of God in here, and that's Hamakom, okay? The place, but Makom is also one of those traditional words for. So you could translate in verse 3 that he got up and he went to the place, or he went to God, which is where God had told him to go. So.
Okay, Marty.
I think the only thing missing is some background music to build the story up even more.
No, excuse me. And this we'll talk about in a couple of months when we get a chance to do it.
Okay.
What's also missing is Sarah's voice.
Oh, well, true.
Yes.
Okay.
You
Very, very important that her voice is missing.
Yep.
Larry has been trying to say a few things. Yes.
You mentioned the phrase, he was physically burdened. So I ask you to visualize an old man trying to climb up a mountain, schlepping wood, fire, a knife. I mean, this is a test.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions?
Just
Yes.
one for the rabbi. It's really a repeat. Could you say the name of God that you just said? I got the place, but I missed what you said.
The Hebrew word makom, which is translated as place, is also one of the traditional biblical names for God.
Makom. How do you spell that?
And
Memko.
And in English, M-A-K-O-M or M-A-Q-O-M.
Yeah, Rabbi, could you explain the origin of why place would be a name for God?
Well, it's not addressed necessarily. It's a rabbinic, overlay. It's the rabbis use Makom as a name for God rather than Abraham or any of the patriarchs or something using it that way.
I understand that, but I'm just curious as to why that would have emerged in the rabbinic language as, we all understand this as a euphemism for God.
I think they do it, and I'm only thinking and speculating. They off of the phrase from Jacob's dream, which is Manorah Hamakom Hazeh. How awe-filled, how awesome is this place? And why would he be saying that a stone is awesome? The stone that he laid under his head or whatever. So obviously Jacob is referring to God that way. Hence, I believe that's where it comes from.
Any question being raised by Abraham saying, God will see to the sheep for his burnt offering, my son?
Yeah.
What, Steve?
Well, that's like I said, it's adding to the drama, because in our simple original reading of the story, the straightforward reading of the story, that's an out and out lie. The truth is in Abraham's mind right now, again, the simple reading of the story is that Isaac is going to be sacrificed. He's not telling him, my son, we're going to sacrifice you. He says, hey, you know, God will take care of everything, you know. When people start lying during a mystery or during any sort of dark story, you know, that kind of adds to the drama, you know, that people are lying. There are things being covered up. There are things that are not being mentioned. Okay, and we have to wait for the climax to find out what's going to really happen. So that's my way of looking at it, based on the old story, which I'm now questioning. I think this is probably the best discussion of Akedah that I've ever been. This is, you know, because this does raise some additional stories that are very, very interesting.
I think this is one reason why there's you had the rabbis and others having to fill in missing pieces to come up, because what they're walking for so long, and what's going through their mind. There must be something else. And I think that it's the something else that gives us more insight into the different possibilities, the different ways this story could have taken us. Rabbi, and then Suzanne.
I will just present, as we did with that earlier operative phrase about offering him up as a sacrifice or teaching him as a sacrifice. Here's the alternative translation of the phrase that you're talking about, that Abraham says to, in response to Isaac's question, where's the sheep or whatever, not God will see to the sheep, but God will be seen in the sheep. Okay. Okay. It's legitimate translation of the Hebrew, that God will be seen, or God will be revered, or God will be experienced through the sheep that will be sacrificed, my son.
Really? That's
interesting.
Yep.
So
legitimate.
Is this being prophetic?
I need to think about.
Does Abraham really know that this is going to happen?
I'm sorry, Martin, say it again.
Does Abraham know that a sheep, a ram in this case, will be seen at that site? Is this
maybe that's his hope?
Okay.
Don't know.
Okay.
Incidentally, as long as we're playing with all the Hebrew words, going back to the initial sentence where we were talking about that when God said, take your only son, and we were looking at the Hebrew word yachid.
Yeah.
All right. Yachid is the same root as this phrase here, that the two of them walked along yachdav. The two of them walked along as one.
As one.
Okay. And so it kind of, in a literary sense, it connects that Abraham and Isaac have this relationship, the favored relationship, or the unified relationship, that they're unified in this experience together.
Thank you. Suzanne, you had your hand up first, then Larry.
Yeah. Well, just a quick comment and then a question. That maybe Abraham was, maybe it was wishful thinking when he said about, God would provide a lamb. But I'm very intrigued by what the rabbi just said. Which verse did that translation refer to?
8, verse 8.
Verse 8.
Okay, God, the typical translation, or as Steve is saying, the Peshat, the straightforward translation would be, Abraham said, God will see to the sheep for the burnt offering, my son. But a legitimate alternative translation is that God will be seen for him, or God will appear for him, the him here meaning Isaac, as the sheep for offering.
Oh, okay. I mean, to me, in my view, that sounds very messianic to me. I mean, it may not to others, but that's how I'm getting it. I just find that fascinating.
Yes, Larry.
I've often heard at times when people are faced with unpredictable challenges, they don't know what could happen. The answer is, don't worry, God will provide. I wonder if
Larry, you broke up.
Yeah, I see. I don't know.
You may want to repeat that.
I can't help, gone.
Oops.
Yeah.
Larry, can you hear us?
He's broken.
I can't answer Larry.
Right. I think what he was saying is that people sometimes, when they're presented with the challenge, people will say, well, God will provide.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
You know, trust in God, God will provide. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Don, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to comment that, as I said, this is the most intense scene for me in the whole Tanakh, but it reminds me of a stage play in which just the previous chapter, we've got all the characters out there, you know, there's Sarah and Hagar and all the boys, and all of a sudden the lights go out and the spotlight comes down on this scene on Mount Moriah, which is the very core of Judaism, this, to me anyway, this scene. And so I wonder, I know with any text there are alternative interpretations because we can't actually be there. But without the way this developed, the way we're reading it, without alternative interpretations, without that, it's as if everything leading up to that and everything that comes after it is invalid, that it has to happen the way it appears on the surface. I probably didn't say that the way as well as I intended, but I'll quit there. Thanks.
No.
Okay. We will see how things unfold, and I think, Don, there's a lot to say. Yes, that will be one of the interpretations. Yes. Any other questions or comments at this time? Okay, then if somebody wants to read verse 9.
I'd like to read verse 9. Oh, Steve, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you can go ahead if you want to.
Well, the reason I wanted to read 9, and I'm reading this book again called The Bible, the Sources Revealed. So you have many different sections written by different people that are inserted here and there during the Torah. That's the theory, okay? Pretty good one. And if you read only the one source continually and leave out the ones that are inserted, the story doesn't lose. It sounds like a continual story. You don't notice the interruption. So what I like to do is just read this one source, and it goes from 9 and it skips 11 through 15, which is very important.
Okay.
So I'm going to read that and then, your comments, because it's going to leave out a very critical section. And they came to the place that God had said to him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood, and he bound Isaac his son and put him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham put out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. And now we're going to skip to 16, okay? And he said, I swear by me that because you did this thing and did not withhold your son, your only one, that I'll bless you and multiply your seed like the stars of the skies and like the sand that's on the seashore, and your seed will possess its enemies' gates. And all the nations of the earth will be blessed through your seed because you listened to my voice. And 19, and Abraham went back to his boys, and they got up and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived in Beersheba. Period. End of that particular, section. So it carries on. It's very clear, but it leaves out the part that we're going to discuss now, I'm sure.
And that's what I was
Why-
referring to, that there are variant texts
Yes. Yeah.
that make it sound as if indeed Isaac was
The deed was
slain
done.
at the top of the mountain.
Yep. And it's very clear, if you read it that way. It loses some meaning, but
Okay. Any other comments about what Gail was pointing out? Yes, Steve.
Even though, again, obviously on our older original reading, it was enough that Abraham indicated a willingness
yep.
to go ahead and sacrifice, which is our older understanding of it. Was, you were tested, you showed a willingness. We stopped you in time, but you indicated a willingness to go ahead and really actually do this. So it's still, possible to interpret it the old way and, see it as it's, again, this
Traditional.
somewhat, and I think one of the driving forces behind the alternative interpretations, obviously, and I'm stating the obvious here, is because it's such a disturbing story, is because it doesn't, again, every story is characters. God is also a character in this story. No disrespect to God, but that's just, what functionally he is within the story. And he doesn't appear, at least based on our modern sensibilities, to be a completely positive character.
Yep.
This is pretty horrible thing to put someone to, and we do hold God to a higher standard in general. This is if a person were to be doing this to another person, it would be considered quite sadistic.
Well, Grace says something about this. Grace, are you still there? Well, her cute puppy.
Oh,
was very,
I did read Grace's comment. Yeah, I see
yes.
Grace's comment.
Grace, would you like to expand on what you mentioned? That you thought that God was testing the faithfulness between both of them as father and son, Abraham and Isaac. Did you want to expand on that somewhat, Grace?
A little bit, right? So we know what's going to happen. And my interpretation is God's kind of testing both of them to see what their camaraderie is between the two of them, and watching as things are building up for this sacrifice, or
Yes.
the idea of it, because we know later on, what actually goes into play. And I like the interpretation that Gail read, and I'm just waiting to hear from, Rabbi a little bit more, Norman, and kind of pitter patter my way around. My swamp cooler has been turned on, so it's quite loud, and that's why I'm trying to keep that silent button going. So
But you're doing okay. We can't hear that badly.
Oh, well,
You
that's
can,
good.
you,
You
you
can
know,
hear me okay?
yeah, you're doing fine.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you.
Rabbi Grace asked a question about the relationship between, is this also a test in the relationship between Abraham and Isaac?
The answer would have to be certainly it is. It's also, I think Don said before, this is one of the formative, most challenging texts in all of our literature. In their wisdom, although sometimes we put question marks on it, but in their wisdom, the rabbis told us that this is a Torah portion we're supposed to read on Rosh Hashanah of all days. So this is not only a challenge for us to understand the story, but for us to put ourselves in the footsteps of Abraham, of Isaac, maybe even of God. And I would throw in of Sarah as well, or of I'm thinking of 40 years worth of different sermons here, but of the servants. How do they understand what's going on? Should they have said something, or should they be just standing by and twiddling their thumbs? So yes, this is an episode and for us to try to understand the relationship between father and son, as well as between the questions of how we see ourselves as being faithful. Who's the ideal here? Whose behavior are we supposed to be modeling if we want to be considered faithful ourselves?
Marty?
Yes, Steve.
Yeah.
That's very important, Rabbi.
To just sort of to address the elephant in the room, again, this is all stuff that is running in the background as we read this story. It does raise, again, by the measurement, the older version of the story does raise in our modern sensibilities difficult questions, because it exhibits the test or the experiment, the experience was asking of someone to demonstrate their faithfulness to God by committing murder. And in the modern world, I don't have to tell you that there are persons that are caught up in religious fervor and see murder as justified if it's done in the name of God.
Yep.
In the old days, we Jews could commit similar acts of zealotry. I think we distance ourselves from that today.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the reasons why we have difficulties reading the story, or struggling to find alternative readings of the story. So hopefully we don't have to deal with this question of can you really demonstrate faithfulness to God by committing murder? Is there any situation where I demonstrate that I'm a good Jew by going out and killing somebody?
Excellent points. Before I recognize Suzanne, what I'm gathering here, and that was why, and somebody raised, well, why do we go through all of this? This discussion. This is a test of Abraham. Yes. It's a test of Isaac. Well, yes. It's a test of Sarah. Yes. We've commented about that. we've tested, and is it a test for the servants or the lads or the boys, whatever you want to call them? Yes. And it is a test for us. It's not just a story. The debate we're having is a test for us, and how we get through, and with all the different ways of interpreting and looking at this, it becomes a test for all of us. It doesn't matter which, again, I always say, we all have our own favorite interpretations, but it's how we put that test of faith into action is going to be determine the event, the outcome for us in today's world. It's much. I think that this is much deeper. Thank you, Grace. But I'm going to toss that out before we get on to the conclusion of the test as written here. So, Rabbi, yes.
I just wanted to go back to something that I had clued you into earlier, and Marty, I agree with every word that you just said. Is we have to remind ourselves of what happened. You know, what happened just before this. Okay, what are the experiences that had brought Abraham to this moment? What are the experiences that had brought Isaac to this moment? What had they witnessed? What was going on in their mind? We can't overlook the fact that Abraham had this tragedy of having to banish his son. Isaac, was he happy that Ishmael had been sent away? Was he angry at his mother for doing that? We just don't know. But those are all psychological pieces of the puzzle that might help us see ourselves in this story, which is what you're talking about
Right.
doing. Yeah.
So, yes, Don. I'm sorry, Don. Let me let Suzanne go. She had her hand up first.
Sure.
Okay, I know what I'm about to say is contrary to, the group here, but for me, I don't see this, I interpret this differently. I see this as God's love for us, because to me, this story is foreshadowing the crucifixion of Jesus, and for Jesus to die for our sins. And where Isaac was obedient to his father, Abraham, so was Jesus obedient to his father God, if that's how one believes. So, and I don't believe that God ever intended for Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. I think it was just to illustrate what God was willing to do for humans, and his love for us. I mean, that's how I look at it. But I have a quick question, since we didn't read all the verses. Verse 14 mentions that Abraham called that place Jehovah Jireh, and I was
Yes, that we'll probably get to next week.
Oh, okay. I was wondering
that part, because that's the outcome that's in the text. So
Okay.
we'll get to that next week. Yes.
Okay,
Save your question. Okay.
I will.
Okay, Don.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there's so much we don't know and can't know just in the text. But one thing, and I'm sure the rabbis have discussed this over centuries, but the flip side would be if Abraham said, "No, I'm not going to do this. I'm just not going to do it. I don't even know if you're God. Do you have a picture ID?" So But the reward, the payoff for Abraham, which he couldn't have known about, was that he would be the genetic source of all Jews that followed, and the world was, his seed was multiplied many times. He could never have known that, but that was his reward. And at that time, there was no concept, at least in the text, of an afterlife. So whatever, reward he was going to get would be right within his lifetime. And the worst he could expect would be getting treated like Job, maybe, for the rest of his life.
Okay, well, let's hold that for next week also, because we haven't gotten to those. I know we haven't gotten to that part yet. I wanted to insert what I mentioned because by discussing the test before the reward is important for all of us. Okay, because otherwise we would say, oh, well, there's a reward for being this faithful. Right now, when we're put to a test, at this point, what is our motivation? Do we have to put here, God is asking Abraham to put away all of his morality, if we go with this interpretation, and that I come before all of morality. That's one way of looking at it. And I think that, so before we even get to the reward phase, we need to think, what are we being asked to do? Or what is Abraham being asked to do? And because we couldn't come up with any specific answer, we had lots of different ways of looking at it. Maybe it's how we interpret it for ourselves that is the real test.
Was there a quid pro quo?
No, but this is, because if you know the answer in advance, it's easy. There is one way to look at it, but it isn't that easy to do this, because you're being asked to put aside an awful lot. Okay, and so that's why it becomes it's very difficult. And I really want to thank everyone for the discussion today. At this point, I think this is a good time to end it, and then next week we can pick up with the reward. And I purposefully use that phrase. But I think that next week we will have even more questions, multiple questions. This is as Don placed it, the rabbi mentioned it as well. This is one of the most pivotal stories in the entire Tanakh, as the way I have to put it from my point of view. And this is why everything moves up to this climactic point, and everything else that follows is not as powerful, if you will. We'll make it powerful, but the story, comes down from the climax here. Rabbi, was there anything else you wanted to add, or Steve, or anyone else that's here? Yes, Steve.
Oh, not in reference to the story, but just when we get to the announcements portion.
Oh, okay. Well, if there are no other comments or questions up to this point, Ruth Ann, did you have anything you wanted to point out?
So we have the movie coming up on Tuesday and service on Friday.
Very good.
Okay.
And Steve?
Yeah, and on Thursday, I've been doing these programs. They've ended up being mostly about Jewish entertainers. I think people are getting a kick out of them. The last one was on Eddie Cantor. And it emerged when I was letting people know that the topic was Eddie Cantor, that we actually had a celebrity connection.
Yes.
Not 5 degrees of separation, more like 3 degrees of separation from Eddie Cantor. That was Bill Forster,
Right.
whose mother was an aspiring actress and knew Eddie Cantor when she was just starting out. And he was telling us some stories. It was very interesting. That next Thursday, I'm planning to do a program about Ladino and some Ladino songs from the Sephardic tradition. So yeah, just letting people know, and this is open to everybody, and please come. I'm usually just piecing. I've gotten okay with the technique of piecing together a PowerPoint from videos, so it goes fairly smoothly, and we can all watch something together and then talk about it. Yeah, Gail is smiling. I think Gail had a good time.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to do next week is I'm going to, once we finished with the story, this story, I'm going to read some poetry by Ruth Brin, and she for those of you who do not know, she has written a number of poems. They are drashes that deal with different parts of the Bible and the different stories that we read. And I want to use that as a takeoff point for discussion. And so I'll sort of mention that. Yes, Rabbi.
As long as we're referencing supplemental texts, for those of you who might be Leonard Cohen fans,
yes,
Leonard Cohen also has a song that he wrote about the Abraham and Isaac episode that you might want to look that one up too.
Okay. Okay.
Woody Allen has a piece as well, but we're not sending you there.
Mhm. Could you give us the title? Which title in particular it's not in Hallelujah, is it?
No, it's not. It's
No.
not Hallelujah. If I got 30 seconds, I'll see if I can find it.
Sure.
I remember the lyrics. I just don't remember the name of the song.
Oh, Don, thank you for the reference to that Chaim Maccoby. I'm looking it up.
Yes.
He's a great writer. Is it You Want It Darker, Rabbi? Is that the one you're thinking of?
Oh,
I'm
you
sorry?
want it darker.
You want it? Is that where the cantor is singing with him?
I can't understand what's being asked. I'm sorry.
Oh, the Leonard Cohen song.
Yeah.
I thought, is it the one where the cantor is singing on the same track?
No.
No.
No. It's a song. The door had opened slowly. My father, he came in. I was 10 years old or something like that. I thought I had a list in this particular book of all the Leonard Cohen, but I guess not. I'll find it for next week.
Please, thank you. Any other comments? Well, with that,
The title is The Story of Isaac. I just
That's
Googled it.
Uh-huh.
The Story of Isaac by Leonard Cohen.
Yep. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, Joanne, you were going to address something.
In this, what we're reading, it is a story of an understanding of faith, to believing in God, to following the God that you believe in, etc. And maybe this week, each of us could think of times when we really didn't want to follow what God was telling us, but we did. Just kind of as something to go over in your own mind, in your own faith for this week.
Good point. And I'm going to echo Grace's comments. Thank you, Rabbi, for everything that you contributed today. It was very, very helpful. And
Thank
Steve,
you.
too. And also Don and Joanne with good questions. Suzanne, Grace.
Looks like Suzanne
Gail.
just went to Hawaii.
Yeah.
I was tired of outer space.
Anyway, thank you, everyone. And